Hi everyone, and welcome back to another teaching and learning video. Today we're going to be talking about face-to-face pedagogy and provide you some resources that you can use in terms of upping your game with teaching a face-to-face class. Every type of class that we teach, whether we're teaching face-to-face, distance education, or in our LTCC Rising Scholars Program, formerly known as ISP, or Incarcerated Students Program, we realize that there are challenges and unique opportunities to connect with our students. And certainly as you get from our TNL website focusing on the foundations of teaching, there are great teaching practices that you can apply to any type of teaching regardless of the modality. But we do have to admit that each type of teaching modality has its specifics and its challenges and approaches that you can use to better connect with those students, just due to the obvious technological or other difference that we note in that type of classroom, whether ISP, face-to-face, distance education, hybrid, or even HyFlex, which is maybe something we'll do in the future. So today we're focusing on face-to-face teaching. So we mean by this, we go to a classroom like just across from my office here on B103, and we teach in a classroom. There are desks, there often is a podium, there is a projector, there's the internet. In fact, the modern classroom, the face-to-face classroom, since I've been teaching here starting in '98, has changed drastically, and that's why we're starting to talk about things like a HyFlex classroom, where you might teach a physical face-to-face classroom, having that presence with your students inside the class, and then maybe also live streaming for students at a distance. Presents some unique challenges there, certainly doing something like HyFlex, but the idea behind it could be very interesting and an opportunity for innovation at various levels. So the classroom here at LTCC has changed remarkably. So now you have a lot of smart technology in the classroom, and that's really indicating that emphasis on the fact that technology needs to be something that's omnipresent for our students, whether they're taking a distance ed class or a face-to-face one. So if you walk into any number of our classes on campus, I'm recording this video in 2022, and certainly as we go into the new wing and student services and that entire area that's being remodeled. In fact, right now, you can't help but notice on campus, just out here, there's all this construction outside my office, and everywhere you go, there's construction now. So the good news about that is a lot of the classrooms that we're getting because of the grant, because of the bond, will allow us to really up our game in teaching more innovative and immersive face-to-face classes. So jumping to my resources here and ideas, what I want to suggest to you is there are some key foundations or principles that you can think about in terms of face-to-face teaching. What I hope to do over time is share more and more resources with you. One of the things I've been doing in the summer here of 2022 is trying to find more resources that you can use, written by other people, by other experts, teaching in a variety of different disciplines beyond, say, anthropology or sociology or the social sciences for me. As an example of that, I recently found this very cool website called The Cult of Pedagogy. And this is a great website that gives you videos, it's a blog, it's a podcast, there's even a store, and you can really think about a lot of issues in teaching. As you can see here, you have the craft of teaching. So you could get into classroom management, and a lot of great ideas here about classroom management issues. And this one is really extensive, by the way, so it's one I really wanted to share with you. There's a whole focus here on equity. And at LTCC, we know the importance of emphasizing DEI efforts in our classes, and we're doing a much more pronounced focus on that here starting in, well, not just 2022, but that's the year I'm doing this video. And you can see all the great examples here of doing equity, universal design language, street data, anti-racist schools. I just think this is a really great resource. Professional development, leadership, learning theories, the soul of the teacher, and even some topics here that you can look at by browsing by topic. So I just encourage you to look at some of these resources. As I find more of these, what I'm going to do is put a special section on the TNL website, and that specifically will be on the teaching area. So if you click on the teaching tab, you'll have information there. Again, to review that, you have the foundations listed here, and then specific to our video today, this is the face-to-face teaching track. So you can see here that there's a lot of good information, not a lot actually in this area. I haven't done as much on face-to-face, and it's one of the reasons I wanted to do this video to really get this going. I had this on my list to do over the last couple of years, and I've just been busy with other projects and COVID and working with ISSE and other instructors, and so this is a great opportunity to really emphasize the significance of face-to-face teaching, particularly as we're going back to it now, kind of in these post-COVID years, although COVID still remains certainly a great public health challenge around the world here in 2022. So be on the lookout for more resources as we move along here talking about face-to-face. Now, I think it's important here to talk about variation and the different modes of teaching. So quite obviously, if you're teaching a biology class versus teaching an anthropology class versus a culinary arts class or a wilderness education class, all of those classes not only have different disciplinary and academic foundations, so the theories that we study in anthropology are going to be different, even with close disciplines like psychology and sociology. So there's a difference in content, there's a difference obviously in approach, if you're doing the arts versus the sciences, the scientific method versus artistic and humanities-based methods. So those are clear differences and forms of variation. We also see that in teaching techniques. Quite obviously, if I'm teaching in anthropology, I'm going to be approaching things through different teaching modalities just because of the different content and the different disciplinary knowledge that's there. So that's really one of the challenges with teaching is because there are different modes out there, you have to think about what's going to work best for your discipline. I obviously can't tell you what's best for biology. At best, I can give you some tips that have worked for me in social sciences, but there are a slew of other fields out there that I couldn't tell you the first thing about. I wouldn't know anything about safety in a kitchen working in culinary arts, or safety teaching avalanche training, or safety teaching chemistry or biology. And that's why we really have to rely on our departments here at the college to really emphasize those content areas that are going to make a difference for you when you're teaching. I always say once you've onboarded here at the college, and whether you're teaching a face-to-face class here in B103 or somewhere else on campus, or you're teaching distance education or LTCC Rising Scholars, really reach out to department heads if there is a department head, because the department head is going to be able to tell you very specifically what might work in a biology class versus a PE class versus an art class, etc. Now, I will tell you, if you're ever interested, I do have some guidebooks here in the office, and these are great for face-to-face instructors. These are free for you, so just come by my office here in B101A. One is 7 Principles for Good Undergraduate Practice in Education. And this one I've really enjoyed because it's quick and dirty. It tells you a few key areas, 7 key areas to get you started with, say, class discussions or having conversations with your students. The second one is much more in-depth. This is a handbook for adjunct part-time faculty and teachers of adults. And this one is great for everyone, including full-time faculty. And this one has much more in-depth information about classroom practices, preparing for the first class. This is an area I really love, and I have some great resources, by the way, on the Teaching and Learning website on getting ready for your very first class and how important it is to make a good first impression with your students. Talking about here course objectives, the course syllabus, email, websites, all sorts of really wonderful information, class policies. So this one I highly recommend. I've got a ton of them here that were passed on to me back from the day when Nancy Barkley, who has since retired, our foreign language teacher, was serving in a role similar to this one, working with instructors on campus. And so this was passed on to me from the part-time faculty office. So feel free anytime to come by my office in B101A and pick up a copy of either of these. So those different modes that we all teach in, we have to recognize, because quite clearly there's a ton of variation, and that's why we have to rely on our department chairs and fellow faculty in the discipline that you teach to be sure that you get all that great content information. And this is certainly important for things like safety. If you're teaching a bio class or a chem class, you want to get with the department chairs or other full-time or part-time instructors who know the physical spaces, because if you're teaching a class brand new and you don't know the safety procedures, if you have a chemical spill, all those important OSHA, HMIS, hazardous material information sheet, data stuff that goes on. It's super important to learn that. So that's why I say to really connect with the department chairs or anyone involved, say in the safety department, who could help you understand some of these important areas that are dynamics of a face-to-face classroom. Now, interactivity is really key. So it's something that we want to really emphasize in a face-to-face class. So one key to interactivity is thinking about how you can vary up your class with different approaches to cover different learning styles. We often talk about the difference between an auditory learner versus a visual learner versus a tactile learner, even all the different senses that are used in a classroom to teach our students. To make a class interactive, we definitely want to think about getting away, say, from just strict lecture. Now, lecture, I would say, can be a very important tool in terms of emphasizing key concepts. I'm actually somewhat suspicious of a class that would never have any lecture. I'm also suspicious of a class that would only have lecture. So you have to think about a balance in class. And I certainly would say that lectures can be highly interactive. I think sometimes they're not. In fact, TED Talks are an example of, really cool talks and succinct talks that really can inspire you about a lot of different areas of everyday life, of science, of the arts, of really everything that is covered in a given TED Talk. At the same time, I think TED Talks have been emphasized too much, and they're incredibly non-interactive. When you watch one of those TED Talks, you never see anyone interacting with an audience. You might see people reacting and applauding and laughing if someone's doing a great job on stage and they're killing it doing one of their lectures. But the TED Talk style is very canned. It's very formulaic. If you've studied TED Talks, there's a certain style that people use. It's very much a soundbite type of approach. If you watch long lectures on YouTube of academics giving talks at big universities around the world, they can be upwards of 1 or 2 hours in length. And I sometimes hear people, talking about lectures can be boring, but they can also be highly engaging. That being said, you don't want to only lecture in a face-to-face class. So think of some strategies that you can use to create greater interactivity in your face-to-face class. And I'll just show you an example of this. So this is a book I co-edited with some other anthropologists called Strategies in Teaching Anthropology. And one of our goals in editing this collection is to really make anthropology teaching more interactive. And this is an example of using the traditional game of Monopoly and to focus on economic issues in anthropology. So the idea behind teaching strategies and teaching anthropology is to really think of very specific techniques that you can use. This was written really for face-to-face classes. In a face-to-face class that will allow students to learn a key concept and that will make it much more interactive and exciting. This is an example. There's something called a Kula ring that takes place in a place called the Trobriand Islands. And the Kula ring is what we call a circulating connubrium, where you have a circulation of different goods around a set of small islands. So you have armbands and beads that go in opposite directions, and there are formal rules about how those goods move in those particular cultures. So this is a way of taking that very, I don't want to say dry, but fairly abstract and classic example in anthropology and making it more meaningful by doing it in an interactive sense. What I'll recommend later here in my slides is that if you have similar resources you can seek out for your face-to-face class, like if you teach econ, go online and look for some of those great strategies that can be used to teach an econ class. So whatever you can do to make your class more interactive is really key. Now, public speaking and presentations, a great opportunity here to really think about how a face-to-face class can leverage opportunities for civic public engagement and presentations. So I would definitely say to consider doing presentations. You could also think about incorporating portfolios in your classes, because in a face-to-face class, you can really build a sense of community, as you can certainly in a DE class. But there's something about the physicality of being together in a similar space, sharing it, moving around, having conversations, and just engaging with one another, like you might talking to some of your friends at a bar or a coffee shop. shop down the street. So having that ability to be physical and be present allows us to do things like create opportunities for students to do public speaking and presentations. That being said, there is a great amount of fear we find with our students about speaking in class. So if you're deciding on doing public speaking, presentations, mini debates, definitely think about preparing your students and scaffolding them up to those presentations, maybe at the end or midterm of your class. What I like to do is have a series of low-stake assignments, low-points assignments leading up to the final presentation, so students aren't stressing out like, wow, my half-an-hour presentation at the end of the quarter is worth 60% of my class grade. So you can scaffold up and work students up. You could have students come into your office hours and have a conversation with you about how to work up to the research and the presentation side of things of their final presentation or public speaking in your classes. So I'm going to just definitely emphasize this because it's a unique opportunity we can all take advantage of in teaching a face-to-face class. Demonstrations are also great. For those of you teaching in sciences and the arts and wilderness and culinary, your entire class sometimes could be a demonstration. It's all hands-on, it's all applied. Sometimes in anthropology, when I've taught archaeology, I've done mock digs, I've done work with osteology with bones and trying to get our students to understand things through physical practices. And it's often very important in anthropology, maybe not so much in cultural anthropology. So demonstrations can be a key opportunity to engage with your students because quite clearly the hands-on approach, like if you're learning the automotive trades, I have a nephew who's going into automotive at a community college. And it's key. You have to work with the cars. You have to work with all the computers and all the diagnostic equipment and materials and technology. So hands-on can really be a great opportunity. It's key for some disciplines. It's really the foundation of many disciplines out there. For others, though, I would recommend thinking about ways of modeling or doing demonstrations. I've even used in my religion classes board games, ironically enough, religious board games to try to get students to think about religion in a maybe more humorous or less serious manner, because religion can be one of those topics that's really sensitive for a lot of students and instructors in taking a class. Okay, I just mentioned this. So seek out discipline-specific guides. So again, for my discipline in anthropology, we have strategies in teaching anthropology. What I encourage you to do is go online and type a very simple Google search. What I would recommend that you do, go to Google and type in, I won't do it for anthropology, but let's do it for psychology teaching strategies. And so what I would really recommend is use the name of your discipline and then the phrase teaching strategies. I think hopefully this will have a lot of hits. So this will have 20 psychological principles that will help your students learn. This might be more specific in general for teaching, and psychology is something that can be applied to all teaching in a lot of ways. But this is 5 psychology best strategies that helps students learn, 4 simple strategies from cognitive psychology, teaching strategies video. Here's teaching methods, a psychology wiki, so you could check this out and see if there are any methods in here that help you to work through some of your teaching approaches or content areas. And yeah, so you can do that for any discipline. So what I recommend again is just do a Google search with teaching strategies and then at the front fill in whatever discipline it is that you're teaching. And I hope you find some stuff. Again, this is one of the hardest parts of my job is I can't advise you on very specific strategies because I don't know all your fields. I can give you the general stuff, and again, the general stuff is available as well, and handbooks like these are really wonderful for getting a clear sense of approaching a class with clear expectations, grading, foundations you could do early in the quarter regardless of the discipline that you teach. Group work. So group work is a great opportunity in all of our classes to really get students to understand key concepts and to also have great class debates and conversations with student colleagues in the class. There are a lot of great techniques out there. We can continue to talk about these, and what I might do over time is subdivide the teaching and learning website in some key areas. So when you go to teaching and you click on foundations, I might have a very specific set of areas there focused on, say, group work. Right now, as you can see, I have key foundations talking about class issues, class techniques, and so forth. But it's one area I want to build out and expand. One of the things to think about when doing group work is the importance of you as the instructor moving around the classroom. I've observed some classes, and I've been guilty of this in my early teaching career as well, where I would assign something to a group of students and then say, okay, go do it. And then maybe I had some grading or something to catch up on or some class prep for my next class. I would work on this at the front of the class. And that was great. It allowed me to multitask during my class. But then I wasn't giving attention to the students who really needed it. Indeed, some students ended up talking, during their small group. Instead of focusing on the exercise at hand, they were talking about what they did over the weekend. And the icebreaker kind of stuff can be a great opportunity in doing group work. You could have students early on, if your class is early in the quarter, you just started teaching it in weeks 1 or 2. Group work can be a great opportunity for students to get to know one another in a class. And this applies to DE teaching as well. However, what I would say is if you have too much of that time built in for just students talking and having conversation and discussing light things and not addressing the group tasks that you have at hand, it just leads to problems, because then if you have the groups report out, which is another great technique that you might want to think about, if you have students reporting out, you have that possibility of missing out because the students haven't been having good conversations amongst themselves during that group work time. So you just want to make sure that you keep students on task. You also want to make sure that you walk around the classroom to be sure that you have opportunities for students to stay on task, and if they have any questions, you can offer them commentary during their group work that is based on your expertise as that discipline expert. So I really recommend group work. It's one of the great techniques that I use in a face-to-face class to break up the monotony of things. If you're just doing lecture, again, it can get really boring and you just want to think about doing something more experiential. I think in a classroom where you have a lot of subject that's open to debate, and a lot of disciplines fall into this realm, as we're talking about COVID-19 right now, there's a lot of science denial out there in the world, and I think it's definitely an opportunity to have students debate and have conversations about the value of science in terms of studying, say, epidemiology and understanding a really bad disease like COVID-19. Now, this is also equally important. You can use opportunities in your class to explain something that's very abstract and theoretical, kind of like what I mentioned with the cooler ring. So I have something that's really abstract in my anthropology textbook, and I might be using an open source textbook. This is a great example of one. This is talking about demonstrating reciprocity and fairness. So reciprocity is a key concept we talk about in studying economics in anthropology. It can be very boring. Reciprocity refers to gift giving, let's say, an exchange. So I give you something, you give me something in return. Maybe it's a birthday gift or a holiday gift. Well, sometimes we do a lecture on this and students are kind of falling asleep in the classroom because they're like, wow, this is really boring. Can you give me an example? So maybe you do a short video that expresses this. Maybe you find a website. There are great websites out there that allow you to get into economics and exchange and see that actually happening in real time with examples, with calculators and formulas that all operate through scripts on the website. So any opportunity to explain an abstract or highly theoretical concept and turn it into something practical and experiential is really key in a face-to-face class. And again, there's overlap here. It's going to be key in your Rising Scholars class. It's also going to be key in your distance education class or a hybrid class. But because we're talking today about face-to-face classroom pedagogy, we can really say there's a ton of value in expressing something in as least abstract and least theoretical terms as possible for our students. So again, consult the discipline guides out there, because a lot of people have spent time writing about and editing techniques that can be used to make concepts in your field more understandable and more practical and more hands-on, as opposed to really high-level theoretical abstract that students have no understanding of because it's just really way in the clouds and maybe beyond their understanding, not because they don't get it or they can't get it, but because they haven't been exposed to the material that you're teaching them. So that's a great opportunity for us to take the theoretical and abstract, make it practical, make it experiential and everyday in nature. Digital fluency. Now you might be saying, well, I'm teaching a face-to-face class only. I'm not teaching online. Why do I need to have digital fluency? And by the way, digital fluency refers to the idea that students and instructors are fluent in the digital technologies that we use to deliver our classes and indeed enter the workplace. If you talk to Amber Gologowski or Frank Gerdeman, anyone on campus who has a clear connection, Nicole as well in counseling, to careers and specific workplace issues, they're going to tell you that one of the key things you need for success in the workplace is digital fluency. You need to know the new technologies out there. You need to understand them. You need to have a concept of how to use those technologies when you get that job that you're looking for in a particular field or career pathway. So I think it's really important to stress this in our classroom. It's also an opportunity to emphasize using digital techniques in our classes and technology, not just to emphasize that students be familiar and thus fluent with them and to learn about them, but it's also a great way to make your class more interactive and experiential, as I've been talking about. A lot of times you can use digital technology, whether it's the internet, whether it's video, a ton of modeling apps out there on the internet or even on your phone that you can use. My phone is right up here now. Are great opportunities to really emphasize a key area with your students that's experiential and also content significant in your field, in your discipline. So as much as possible, bring in the digital and technological world to your face-to-face classroom, even though we talk about it as kind of a brick and mortar classroom, much in the same way that we might refer to a big box store as a brick and mortar store, as opposed to an online digital store like Amazon.com. Now, I also want to emphasize the value of immersion in a classroom. And immersion, the idea of immersion comes from the idea of, if you will, you jump into a lake and you get wet. You immerse yourself in the lake, you feel the lake, it's around you, it's omnipresent. In my specific area of study, in terms of some of the research I do and also the consulting, is in the arena of immersion. And so this particular text, the Immersive Worlds Handbook, was written to give the designers of themed and immersive spaces opportunities to understand how to make their spaces more compelling to the people that visit those spaces. So if you go to Disney World or if you go to a museum, how can people really get engaged in the understanding of what you're trying to teach them or what content areas you're trying to provide to them, whether it's entertainment or more education like in a museum, in a way that's not going to bore them. If you go to old school museums and you have a docent walking around, the guide just telling you about stuff and you're not really interacting with anything, you might fall asleep. Likewise, you go to an old school museum and they just have a bunch of text and signage on the wall, and you look at it and then you look at a display, you look at a second display, you look at a second set of signage and text that's written maybe 10 paragraphs long, and you're kind of like, wow, this is really interesting, but it's just really not my thing. I want to interact with something. Well, that's the challenge of immersing someone in a space. So immersion really gets into this idea of how we can envelop someone, how we could surround them with everything that we're trying to teach them, or in the case of the entertainment spaces that I study and consult on, the stuff, the brands that we want people to enjoy, or the transmedia forms like Marvel and DC Comics and so forth that people love, or Harry Potter if you go to the wizarding world of Harry Potter. So we're getting into that realm of immersion. What I like to say is in a face-to-face class, you should be thinking, we all should be thinking about immersing our students in the experiences of learning about your discipline as opposed to teaching them. In my report to the board, I really emphasized this, and I said we really should be thinking about creating classrooms, whether virtual classrooms or physical classrooms, that are immersive and experiential spaces. So instead of teaching you about anthropology, I'm going to give you the experiences of anthropology. That's going to require more work on my part. Maybe it requires service learning. Maybe it requires a field trip. Maybe I have to do modeling and exploration of concepts in my face-to-face class through group work and through physical activities where students interact with one another. Maybe that involves creating mini plays or dramas in your classroom. Whatever that involves, the emphasis there is on immersing the students in the experiences of your field as opposed to teaching them the content of your field. If you want to think about this in terms of hot and cold and old and new, the very old version of this, what we're talking about is I'm teaching you anthropology. That's kind of the old tired version. The new, cool, hip, and hot version of this is I'm immersing you in the experiences of an anthropologist or what anthropology is. So if you can kind of make that shift mentally, you can then start to shift your classroom into being more a space of possibility, a space of design, a space of becoming that happens as you and students co-create experiences in the field that you're studying. That actually sounds a little theoretical and abstract, but I think we could have some further conversations about this because it's something that I study and enjoy working with designers in the themed immersive spaces industry. But I'm really interested in bringing this more into the fields of pedagogy here at Lake Tahoe Community College. So I wanted to mention that. And very specific to this is the area of gamification and doing simulations. So a simulation would be kind of like doing that simulation of the Kula ring that I mentioned earlier. Instead of just lecturing your students about what the Kula ring is, you say we're going to set up using some props. So maybe you have to purchase these, or maybe you bring in or make some stuff, or students help you make this stuff. And then you do a simulation in class. Gamification is very similar. So the idea is, can you use a game approach? It could be a board game. More likely, it's probably going to be something on your phone, an app, or an online technology that allows you to really gamify the experience. An example of this, and I mentioned this, I believe, in the workshop that I did on using games in your teaching, you can go to Google and type up serious gaming. And you can see I already did it here. And somewhere here, I want to say it's Penn State, there's a really great list of serious games. And I'm trying to see here if we can find one of these. As you can see here, they're saying playing serious games constitutes experiential learning. So serious games is trying to take a topic that's very serious, like the crisis of global warming, and gamify it. So it would turn the topic of global warming into a game that you would play, and then it would allow you, because it's more experiential in nature, to better use or to better come to an understanding of that particular area. As you can see here, there are a lot of simulations in the world of business, and I wanted to find an actual serious game. I didn't look this up ahead of time, so we may not find it today. Let's see. This is a lot of the theory on serious gaming, and certainly I would say the theory on serious gaming is well worth your time. I just wanted to find one actually that you could actually play. Well, this is an example here. This is at Rochester Institute of Technology, RIT, in New York, and they created a serious city, and they wanted to mimic real-life incidents. And it shows you here that they went about creating this game. They did all the user design behind it. And there's been a lot of cool games created, simulations created around the issue of a pandemic, not unlike the one we're going through now. So if you get a chance, check out and maybe do some searches for serious games in your fields. Something as simple as a quiz program using Quizlet on your iPhone or using on the internet can be another great opportunity to really emphasize interactivity and turning something into a game. I'm a big proponent of this, so anytime you can use a simulation or gamify your class, I highly recommend it. As I said earlier, this is kind of a repeat. Focus on active learning versus lecture. So lecture is I speak to you, and the theory is it doesn't work very well through osmosis, through absorption. You take all the information in and you learn it. There's that old quote, a Chinese philosophical quote, the difference between telling me something and showing me something. And that is really the difference between passive learning and more active learning. So lecture is great. I'm not going to slam lecture and say it's not ever useful. I think lecture is wonderful. But if you can mix up a little bit of lecture with more active learning, that's great. An example of that is really sitting down with your class ahead of time. If you're doing your lesson plan, I don't have my whiteboard today, it's at the home office, but you might sort of map out your class and say, I'm going to use the first 15 minutes to review to do intros and review their quiz from last time. And then I'm going to lecture for 30 minutes. You can think about this as in terms of dividing up your class. And then I'm going to do 40 minutes of active learning, okay? And this could be like a standard for every single class, or you could just, come up with this on the spot, maybe not 5 minutes before class starts, but, do it ahead of time. And then this way you're going to really emphasize in your head, okay, I'm not going to allow myself just to do lecture and even Q&A, which Q&A from students can be interactive, but it can also get a little boring or monotonous for some students if you're just using Q&A as a way to fill time. I think we've all been there and done that in terms of maybe not having our entire lesson or class mapped out for a given class period, and as a result of that we fill it with maybe unnecessary Q&A or overly do the Q&A. So having a component just focused on active learning in a particular class, having this outline set up ahead of time will remind you to do it, and then you could sit down and say, okay, here's a subject. I'm going to lecture on this subject, like the Kula ring. How do I now make it a form of active learning? Is there a simulation? Is there a game? Is there an activity that I can find in a book like Strategies in Teaching Anthropology for my field? If not, I go online and I type in the keyword Kula ring teaching, or how to teach the Kula ring in an anthropology class. You can also, by the way, I really recommend, highly recommend, when you go to Canvas Commons, to look up a lot of these strategies or content areas, because sometimes you'll discover actually that there are strategies built into some of the modules, or gamified simulations built into some of the modules that people have set up here. And just to review this, let's go to Canvas Commons. And what you would do for this is at the top search bar, type in the concept you're looking for. Let's just try the Kula ring. I'm going to be surprised, but you never know. No results. Okay, so if that happens, you can go a level above. So that's like a little too specific. So what's the more general area that the Kula ring falls under? Well, that would be reciprocity. So I'm going to type in reciprocity, and now I have 14 results. So what you can do is you could go through these and say, okay, is there anything here that maybe is going to teach students about reciprocity? I can go up here and filter the results by the grade level. So if I only want undergrad, I can click that, and it'll further filter the results here. I'm just recommending that you go to Canvas Commons or go to the internet, because sometimes you're saying, yeah, I want to commit to doing that active lecture component for at least 30 or 40% of my class period, but I don't know where to start. I'm brand new to teaching a face-to-face class. I want to make it fun and interactive, but I'm totally at a loss. What I then recommend is going online and doing some searching. If you can't find that stuff, what you then do is create it on your own. And we could sometimes sit down in my office here in B101A and have a conversation, because I've done a lot of these. I've also edited books of pedagogy for the field of anthropology, and I've often done this where I sat down. The specific area was called taxonomy, and taxonomy, you understand, in biology, it's the way that we classify different species or organisms, from various trees. We have these branches, and then we branch out into the various different flora or fauna for studying plants or animals. And so I really wanted to teach this in a class, but I was like, I don't have anything to do. I looked through all the Strategies in Teaching Anthro volumes. Nothing was available. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, how the heck am I going to teach taxonomy? So what I did was I created an activity. I printed out different pictures of flora and fauna, including some cryptids like aliens and Bigfoot. And then students worked in small groups trying to arrange and classify the different animals or plants based on characteristics. It could be based on different limbs or features, like wings versus scales versus others, gills. And then based on that, they had to then sit and defend their taxonomic branches or trees that they created. What I did eventually was publish that in one of the volumes, the early volumes in Strategies in Teaching Anthropology. So as you think about your own active learning strategies, step one is, as I said, commit to spending a good chunk of your face-to-face class time on the active learning by putting that mentally as a note, or physically as an actual outline note on your outline as you create it for your class lesson. Then think about a strategy specifically that might be used to teach a concept, and that's when you want to go to the internet to search for your discipline and to see if you can possibly come up with something. If you can't find something from your discipline, then you could actually maybe see if there's a video out there or a website resource that could be especially helpful in terms of creating a form of active learning. Now, super key and important, we're talking about DEI and social justice. And by the way, I'm going to have a video coming up focusing on that really great handbook that was created by an organization that is a multifaceted organization that works with a series of community colleges. And that is that guidebook that Amber and Sue focused on in one of our all faculty days back in 2022. I believe it was in the spring. So there's a whole additional video and trainings I hope that we're going to be doing on DEI and social justice. But I want to just make it very clear that all of us are committed, I know as an institution, to emphasizing DEI and social justice issues more in our classroom. To that end, we have to think about techniques of doing this. So I hope to feature more and more resources here on the Teaching and Learning website to emphasize DEI and social justice concerns. And for a lot of disciplines out there, if you Google DEI or social justice and economics or and mathematics, you're going to find resources out there. So it's very important that you spend a good chunk of your class time, as much as possible, focusing on DEI and social justice issues. Now, some of you may do portfolios in your classes. A portfolio, I think, is pretty common in graphic design, art, web design. A portfolio is basically a book that students create over time that has all their assignments they've done. It could be all their artwork. It could be all images of their sculptures that they've done in their class with Brian. And then the idea is once they graduate, they can present this portfolio. It could be digital, it could be a printout portfolio of really nice glossy color images, and then that's an opportunity to get a job or maybe to get into undergrad or grad school. So the portfolio could be a strategy for you to think about in your face-to-face class or a series of face-to-face classes. Like if you're teaching a 3-sequence history class, maybe there's a way for you to develop a portfolio approach that students who are repeat students can go to time after time. And I think it's a great way to build camaraderie among your students, and it's also a great way to really emphasize some of those techniques of presentation and graphic design and really showcasing student work and showcasing student skills via a digital or print copy portfolio. So definitely think about portfolios, and I know a lot of instructors out there use them, so we can certainly schedule a teaching talk or two about this topic. Now, if you're doing writing intensive classes, if you're Julie or others in the English department teaching the research paper class, the 103, or another class that has a lot of writing, definitely think about varieties in writing assignments. If you do the 1-minute or 2-minute paper, where you tell students, take out a piece of paper, a notebook, write down on your notebook your thoughts about the Kula ring or whatever. What did you learn when you read about the Kula ring? So you have the students do that. They then maybe read out their essays or they reflect on what they wrote about. So it's a great opportunity in the face-to-face class to do actual in-class writing to emphasize writing skills and to get students excited about writing. If students are not doing a lot of writing other than maybe doing social media posts or updates on Instagram or TikTok, we probably need to maybe go back to the basics and say you're going to get out your notebook and you're going to write by hand. I have my Moleskine here I love to use, my notebook, and I'm constantly actually just getting ready for this talk today. I wrote out all these notes the other day. I was waiting for my wife during a doctor's office appointment, and I started writing these out, and I love doing things like circling and drawing arrows and stuff. So I really emphasize with my students the value of having a physical notebook or journal as opposed to doing everything digitally. It's a different modality. So take advantage of doing in-class writing, and I would also say really think about different techniques to mix up the writing. Don't just use the 1-minute paper or the 1-minute writing reflection. Use different approaches to writing. Back in the day when I taught at Valparaiso University in Northwest Indiana, we were required in this freshman first-year experience class to do a series of different writing assignments. And one of the things we had to do in this class was to teach students using a variety of different writing techniques. So I had to actually sit down and discover these on my own. So there were different types of writing. One was a research paper, one was a stream of consciousness paper, the other one was a creative paper with pictures and graphics. So one of the things you could think about in teaching your face-to-face classes, if you're doing a lot of intensive writing, how to vary up the types of writing assignments to make it more creative, maybe to even do some practical sitting down in class. I've actually done workshopping with writing in my classes before, where we all actually sit down. I redacted the names of the students and I had them turn in drafts, and in a circle we did writing critique. It's very how can I put it? It's very eye-opening, but it's also it makes you feel very naked and vulnerable, because you're like, oh my God, these people are hacking to death my work. But it's one of the things I emphasize with my students is when you write professional, when you write books and articles, as I do, peer-reviewed work, people hack that stuff apart, and they're very concerned with, I'm giving you advice and you don't have to take my advice, but I saw it from this way as a reader. So doing peer review in your class can be great. Doing writing circles or critique groups can also be very engaging. You can also, as I said earlier, think about scaffolding, just like for your presentation. Scaffold long writing projects by building up, by saying, I'm going to do low stakes assignments worth 10 or 15 points versus 100 points as you build up to your final research paper if you're teaching 103 in English or whatever. So intensive writing classes, I think it's really incumbent on us to try to vary up the types of writing that we do, because it can get monotonous for students. I just mentioned that first year experience course, which was really great for me, that I taught. And then here at LTCC, I developed and created the Promise first year student experience class. And one of the great things about the first year experience class is that it teaches students, first year students, important values of research, about plagiarism and avoiding plagiarism, about how to seek out help if you're having mental health issues or you're struggling with issues with housing or food or transportation insecurity. So students that go through that first year Promise experience class have a better, I think, set of foundations to understand what our college is like, and hopefully also get some of those vital skills that they'll need to be successful in your class, like how to manage their calendars on their phones, how to use Microsoft Word, how to get software that's open access software that they might need, how to order their textbooks, how to fill out their financial aid application with Naomi in our financial aid office. So I really want to emphasize that if you reach out to Mike, who teaches the Promise first year experience class now, you could get a heads up about what kind of content is covered in that class, including really great information provided by student ambassadors, by Melanie Aponte-Chu, our Director of Library and Learning Services, about how students could take advantage of using the library, all the great online databases, checking out books, getting help with tutoring, etc. So as much as you can as you're teaching here face-to-face on our campus, reach out to the various services, be aware of what's available. If you have any questions, reach out to me or anyone else on campus and we could help you out, because there's so much that is taught to our students beyond the disciplines that we teach that we can really provide to them. And it's a great last slide to end on here, because I think it's something that we don't think about, but all that kind of stuff that has nothing to do with your actual classroom itself, whether you're teaching econ or culinary arts or sociology or anthropology, but it matters so much to the lives of our students, because if they're suffering in our class, if they don't have enough money to purchase food and they come to your class hungry, you can design the greatest active learning experience that has ever been created by anyone on the planet. And guess what? It's not going to matter one bit to that student, because they can't, even at a biological or psychological level, approach engaging in your class because of the challenges that they're dealing with. So those challenges can completely derail or really destroy any efforts that you're making that could be noble and wonderful efforts to teach your face-to-face class. So that's why it's really important to be on top of those non-classroom issues that do impinge and impact upon the class that you're teaching. So this was a series of tips, very general. We didn't get very specific. Again, I really hope in years to come to build out the resources on the Teaching and Learning website, to give you more information that could be specific to your discipline. I would love to collaborate with department chairs over the future and think about how we can set up a great database that allows departments to collaborate with one another so that the minute a new instructor is hired in chemistry or biology, they have the full-time faculty and department leads to go to, but they also have great information about pedagogy and teaching specific class concepts, or using apps, or gamifying experiences in the classroom that can only be found at that very specific discipline content level. So we'll continue to talk about these issues. We'll do teaching workshops on these issues. If you ever have questions or want to pick up any of the handouts or books that I talked about earlier, please stop by my office here in B101A. This entire next year, I'll have drop-in office hours 4 days a week. I will do those as well digitally, so you're always welcome to come here and make an appointment. Just drop in during those drop-in times that will be announced, and reach out to me because I really want to work with you. Again, I'm not an expert on more than a couple of disciplines, but I will get you the resources I can in terms of great face-to-face teaching foundations. And I will hopefully help you with reaching out to your department chair or discipline colleagues to get all that specific pedagogical stuff that you need for your discipline to teach a successful face-to-face class. So thanks for listening today. I'll be back with additional teaching and learning videos in the future.